Welcome to today's webinar. The topic that we covered on this webinar is the Gates MegaSys MXG 4K XTP hose. It's high pressure performance redefined. Presenting this topic is Gates Vice President for Global Product Line Management Hydraulics Division. That's a mouthful. Cindy Cookson. And we'd like to welcome you, Cindy, and thanks for making yourself available to present on this topic. In terms of housekeeping, just before we get started, in terms of housekeeping, we've got a number of people on this call, so we'll have you all on mute just for practical reasons. Although we do have an interactive sort of Q&A sort of section or a box that'll actually show up on your right side of your screen, where you can actually jot down any questions you may have, and we'll raise these questions post-presentation as Cindy goes through it. Now, for any reason we don't actually get a chance to answer all the questions that do come through, you will have my email details at the end of the webinar to discuss such sort of questions. Just so everyone's aware, we are recording this session, so if you know of people that couldn't attend, we will post this recording out on our webinar landing page. All attendees of this webinar will get this landing page link post-webinar. Okay, Cindy, over to you. If you could just give us a brief background in your time at Gates and just talk us through this much anticipated new innovative sort of MegaSys MXG 4K hydraulic hose.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I am excited to talk about MXG 4K, which is one of Gates' latest innovations in our hydraulics lineup. So thanks for the introduction, Kent. So my name is Cindy Cookson. I have been with Gates for 7.5 years. My first 3 years were in our research and development team. My background is in engineering, and I was in a process development team, and then I moved into product line management, both for industrial hose and now for hydraulics. So hydraulic hoses, couplings, tubing, tube fittings, the whole hydraulic lineup. So we have made a number of innovations over the last few years. You know, we started with MXT, and now we're really doubling down on this innovation with MXG 4K. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll just kind of jump into it. So I'm going to start by giving you an overview of MXG 4K. So this is a really innovative product that does match the existing performance of our EFG 4K line. So that's 1 million impulse cycles at the elevated 121 Celsius temperature. Just like EFG 4K, it is qualified with our global spiral line of couplings, and it is available in sizes 6 through 16. Now, you know, I told you this is kind of like EFG 4K, but there's lots of benefits to this MXG 4K product. It's 40% lower force to bend. It's more flexible. It's 30% lighter weight, and it's 8% more compact. Now, not only do we build all that innovation in, but we also qualified this hose against multiple industry standards. So that allows distributors to consolidate inventory and not have to carry so many hoses in the line. And not only did we do that, we also made this hose come standard with our Extra Tough Plus cover. So let's talk about a little bit more about this fantastic cover on the next slide. So Extra Tough Plus, XTP, is the new version of our legacy Extra Tough cover. So just like Extra Tough Plus is 25 times the abrasion resistance of our standard cover. But the plus in Extra Tough Plus is that it's also ozone resistant. So we find that lots of these hoses often are working outdoors in really rough and extreme environments. And so this abrasion resistance coupled with the ozone resistance really brings a lot of value to many customers. So this hose does come with a smooth cover. So legacy spiral hoses all did come with a wrapped cover. So it had like a textured finish. That's really just a difference in the manufacturing processes. It doesn't have anything to do with the compounds that are being used. So we have proven through many field trials and lots of experience that this Extra Tough Plus cover will provide exceptional durability to our customers. So digging into a little bit more, I mentioned that this hose is qualified to meet multiple industry standards. So on the next slide, you're going to see the different standards that this hose is qualified to meet. So first, let's talk about the wire spiral standards. So MXG 4K is fully compliant with ISO 18752 pressure class 280 DC. So this is the million impulse cycles at the elevated temperature. And many times customers think about the ISO 18752 standard as being associated with Parker's Global Core line. So Gates has for years rated our EFG 4K hose against this standard as well. And of course, MXG 4K is fully compliant with this standard. We also exceed the performance criteria of the legacy SAE 100R12 and a few other of those legacy standards. But MXG 4K is using an innovative construction that doesn't meet the particular construction or dimensional requirements of these legacy standards. So we meet all the performance requirements, but we're not meeting the construction requirements. Finally, 16 MXG 4K, so just the largest size, the 1-inch hose, also exceeds EN 856 4SP requirements. So again, it's meeting those performance requirements, but it doesn't meet the dimensional and construction requirements. And remember, this is an innovative hose, right? So when we look at some of these legacy requirements, we're going above and beyond what was possible when those standards were authored. So again, we're meeting the performance of the SAE and EN standards, but we're not meeting the construction requirements. So we also have branded this hose with an applicable wire braid standard. So MXG 4K is fully compliant to SAE 100R19. This is a wire braid standard, and as you may have guessed, this is indeed a wire braid hose. So we are, in fact, far exceeding SAE 100R19 because we are rating this hose at 5 times the industry standard impulse cycles for this hose and also exceeding the temperature requirements. So I'm saying we're doing all this new stuff, right? So let's talk a little bit on the next slide about how Gates made this happen. So let's think about the hose starting from the inside. So from the inside, we have an advanced tube. So this is a tube compound that's specifically formulated to meet the high temperatures required of standard spiral hose applications, but it's also compliant with a wire braid pack. Speaking of the wire braid pack, we are, like I said earlier, we're doubling down on this innovation we have with MXT, where we're able to put a lot more wire and get a lot more efficiency out of that wire in a wire braid construction. So this X reinforcement that we put into MXT is also present in MXG 4K. But in MXT, there's a single layer. MXG 4K has a second layer of wire. MXG 4K actually contains more wire than conventional 2-wire braid hoses. So we didn't just rebrand an existing 2-wire braid hose. This is actually indeed a new construction. So we talked about the tube, we talked about the reinforcement. Now let's move out to that cover. I already told you a little bit about the Extra Tough Plus cover. It is a new cover compound for Gates that's going beyond what Extra Tough traditionally did. So I talked a lot about new things, and this is a lot of innovation. How can you be assured that this works? Well, first, this is backed by Gates' proprietary hose model. So, we have brilliant engineers that use CAD and other design tools to design these hoses using some proprietary hose models. We lab test it to the stringent Gates qualification process. This is built in Gates manufacturing plants using the same high quality standards that we use to build all of our hydraulic hoses. We're following Gates quality systems, the same as our wire braid and our wire spiral hoses. And we did field testing on MXG 4K with numerous customers. And I'm excited later in this presentation to share some of that experience that some of our customers have told us about with the MXG 4K hose. So we are trying to impress upon you that this hose has been extensively tested and proven to work, not just in a lab environment, but also in the field. So, why is this there's lots of innovation in this hose. Why is it so difficult? Well, I will say that the high temperatures of traditional spiral applications really do present unique challenges in hose construction. That elevated temperature is really stressful on the tube compounds in that hose. And furthermore, durability for 1 million cycles really does put a lot of stress on the construction. I just saw a message that the sound's not working. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you okay, Cindy.
Okay.
We'll try and work that matter out. Yeah.
Sometimes on these presentations, you're talking and you don't know if talking to yourself. So all that to say, this is a really difficult construction that we're bringing a lot of innovation to make this happen. This is patent pending technology and something really new and innovative that Gates is bringing to the market. So I mentioned couplings earlier. On the next slide, you'll see that this does work with our standard GS couplings. In particular, though, I do want to point out on this, so on slide 7, that for sizes 6 through 12, we do need a GS1F-2 ferrule. So this is a different ferrule than you needed for the traditional EFG 4K hose. It's guaranteed to work to 1 million cycles, and we just want to make sure that customers notice that they do need that GS1F-2 ferrule for sizes 6 through 12. Size 16 is the normal ferrule, so no changes there. So on the next slide, slide 8, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the comparisons with some of the industry standards or our existing products. So in the first table on the upper left, you're seeing by size for MXG 4K, it has the same minimum bend radius as our EFG 4K hose. So again, these hoses were tested identically. And this minimum bend radius is significantly tighter than both the SAE standard and the ISO standard. So we're going beyond the ISO standard in this case in terms of minimum bend radius. In that middle column, you can see the outer diameter of the hoses. And you'll notice that here again, MXG 4K is more compact than both the EFG 4K hoses and more compact than some of the industry standards as well. And on the right here, you can see the weight. So we talked about some pretty significant weight savings. So we quote the number 30% lighter weight. That's a weighted average among the different hose sizes. But you can see here, this is tremendous weight savings for MXG 4K versus the traditional EFG 4K product. So the other comparison we make is on slide 9. We talk about flexibility. So this is actually the force it takes to bend that hose. Why is it important to you? We're going to get into this more in a little bit, but it's really important to be able to install these hoses. Lots of times, spiral hoses end up feeling more like a pipe than a flexible hose. And so here we're measuring the force to bend. So again, this isn't a measure of minimum bend radius. This is actually the force it takes to bend the hose to meet that minimum bend radius. So here we've compared MXG 4K side by side with our traditional EFG 4K product. And you can see that this hose, again, it's a weighted average. The MXG 4K hose is 40% weighted average more flexible than our traditional EFG 4K hose. So again, this provides lots of advantages to customers. When a hose is more flexible, it means it's faster to install, both for first fit applications, but also when you're replacing the hose, it'll be faster and easier to install that hose. That means improved ergonomics during installation, and it also means a reduced risk of leaks at the manifold after installation. So when hoses are really stiff, it's hard to get the hose and the fitting aligned at the manifold and avoid crossed threads and other installation challenges. So a more flexible hose really does promote right the first time installation. All right, so kind of summarizing on slide 10, these features that we talked about 40% more flexible, 30% lighter weight, 8% more compact, and with that Extra Tough Plus cover, we have 25 times the abrasion resistance of our standard covers. This just drives tremendous value to our customers. So we're now going to talk about not just what the hose features are, but how they can benefit you and how they can benefit your customers and the end users. So moving on to slide 11, where are some places where we can use MXG 4K? Well, first, let's think about applications just in general that are requiring a premium hose with spiral performance. Remember, this is 1 million impulse cycles at high temp, so this really is meeting those spiral performance criteria. Any customers that need lightweight hoses will also benefit for MXG4K with that significant weight savings. Also, customers that they need compact constructions where excellent flexibility is required. Maybe that's because they have complex and tight routings in those systems. The flexibility and the compactness of MXG4K will bring a lot of value to these customers. So on slide 12, we dive a little deeper and say how this can benefit OEMs, distributors, and end users. As we see in lots of more modern equipment, these hydraulic systems are getting really congested. So the lightweight, the compactness and the flexibility really drive benefit for lots of these modern hydraulic systems. And of course, the abrasion resistance and the ozone resistance is kind of a no-brainer for many customers. They understand, especially if they've ever had a hose fail because of abrasion challenges or because of ozone cracking, they understand why this is helpful in their application. Many of our end users and distributors also have ergonomics or health and safety initiatives. This lighter weight hose isn't just faster to install, but it's also more ergonomic to install. That reduces fatigue and strain, and it also just makes it easier to install these assemblies. Finally, for distributors in particular, lots of distributors have given us feedback that they have needs to consolidate their inventory. Less working capital is positive in their operations. And so MXG4K, being branded with multiple industry standards, allows them to minimize their inventory, both in terms of hoses, but also in terms of couplings when they want to use GS couplings. These are great, fantastic advantages. We're now going to talk a little bit more on slide 13 about weight savings. So some customers say, like an excavator is so heavy, why would the hoses matter at all? Well, it really does make a difference to lots of customers. Some of them do have weight reduction targets. So maybe that's for fuel efficiency reasons. Maybe it's for shipping reasons. But lots of customers want to reduce the overall weight of their equipment. So MXG4K can help those customers address those challenges. And of course, I come back to ergonomics. I really do have a respect for people and for employees. And whenever we can improve the ergonomics of a job, I think that drives value for customers, for end users, and for the employees who are working with those hoses. We talk about weight savings. Sometimes it's hard to rationalize that. Just how much does that mean? Well, for 30 meters or 100 feet of Dash 12 hose, MXG saves 26% of hose weight. That's about 10 kilograms on that equipment, and that really can start to add up, particularly when you think about how much hose is on some of these applications. Finally, I want to highlight some electrification opportunities. So any customers who are focused on electrification platforms, whether they're developing these electrification platforms or they're maybe servicing customers who have electric platforms, MXG4K definitely supports these efforts because weight savings is so critical in those applications. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about performance. So performance means lots of things to different customers. Many times we think of performance being the impulse cycles. So clearly this is 1 million impulse cycles when used with GS couplings. So that's 2 times the typical wire spiral standards, 5 times typical wire braid standards. So this is a really durable hose when we're thinking about performance in terms of impulse cycles. But we can also think of performance in terms of the flexibility, the 40% more flexible, or the lightweight, or the compact construction. These can all be considered performance criteria. And finally, when we think of performance, the cover is often considered one of those major performance metrics or criteria. The Extra Tough Plus cover on MXG4K that offers both the abrasion resistance as well as this ozone resistance will extend the life of these hoses beyond a standard cover would. So a little bit more on flexibility on slide 15. So again, we think about flexibility. When you feel this hose, and I hope many of you have had the opportunity to feel an MXG 4K hose side by side with a traditional wire spiral hose, the flexibility is noticeable. And I think when you feel it, you can really think about how this can bring value to your operation. So the more flexible hoses, again, they promote right the first time assemblies. It's easier to flush mount with the manifolds. You have less leaks. It's also easier to route. That reduces fatigue and strain and keeps your operators being productive. It can speed up the assembly and installation time. It's in the smaller minimum bend radius. You know, we compared the minimum bend radius against the industry standards. For many customers, this also means that you can use less hose because you can achieve more efficient routing. So finally, we're going to talk about the compact dimensions, this last criteria. So we talked about weight savings, flexibility, and finally compact dimensions on slide 16. So these compact dimensions are they're possible because of how we've engineered this hose. You know, it's using innovative materials and an innovative wire pack design that does allow this hose to be 8% more compact than our traditional spiral hoses. That means you have more space in your hydraulic systems for other components, or maybe you can even reduce the overall footprint of your hydraulic system. One other benefit that a customer told us about was the ability to upsize the hoses used in their applications. So because MXG 4K is more compact, they were able to go from, I think it was a size 10 to a size 12 hose, and because it would actually fit. Before, they couldn't get this larger hose size to fit. So larger hose meant more fluid flow. More fluid flow means more power output. So they actually realized improved equipment performance because they were able to upsize their hose with MXG 4K.
That's a really good point, actually. That's a great point, because what you're looking at there is you got the same footprint, but with a higher ID hose, theoretically.
Yes. It certainly can drive value for some customers. So finally, you know, we have the Extra Tough Plus cover. So this was that fourth criteria of improvement that we're offering with the MXG 4K hose. So again, 25 times the abrasion resistance plus ozone resistance can bring a lot of value in the rugged applications where I know many of you in Australia operate. So again, 40% more flexible, 30% lighter weight, 8% more compact, and an Extra Tough Plus cover. And it still meets the same performance criteria as Gates Legacy EFG 4K hose. So are you guys ready to find out how this is getting used in the field? So we're now going to talk about some success stories. So we compiled these through field trials as well as through some of the first customers to try this product from Gates. So we're just going to jump in and talk about the first one with a top hammer drill. So this, the customer in this case has approved us to use their name here. This was PT Epiroc. They're operating in Indonesia. This top hammer drill used MXG 4K hose. As you can see here, that's highlighted in red. The old hose lasted 35 to 40 days. Abrasion on the cover usually was the primary cause of failure and the requirement for replacement every 40 days or so. The last time we checked in with them, MXG 4K was running more than 120 days, still operating without a cover failure. So this was a win and definitely was a reason why PT Epiroc in Indonesia continues to buy MXG 4K hose from Gates. On the next slide, you'll see another example. This one is a water well rig. This was a customer in India who used MXG 4K on this rig. You can see some great pictures here of MXG 4K installed. This is a dynamic application where the hose is flexing during operation. They use 5 continuous meters of this hose in this dynamic traveling block on this water well rig. On the next slide is an example of a mine truck. So this is another mine truck, another example from Epiroc, but this is actually installed in Thailand. So the engineers at this site commented that they loved MXG 4K hose because it was so easy to install. So those equipment operators and the technicians who were installing the hoses immediately asked their supervisors to just stock this hose. Don't stock the other legacy spiral hoses because they like this one because of the ease of installation. All right, next we have a few different examples of rock breakers. So I actually have 3 slides here of rock breakers, 3 different installations. These were all in India. So the rock breaker is an attachment typically on the head of an excavator. This particular example here is a Cabelco excavator. And you can see, in this case, the hoses not just are abrasion resistant, but they're also protected with a spring guard. The spring guard isn't for abrasion resistance, it's really to protect from rock crush. So often, you know, as they're breaking the rocks up, they have rocks fall on the excavator head and damage the hoses. So that's why the spring guard is there. So the next slide you can see is another installation. This one is on a JCB excavator. Again, they are using spring guards here, but you can see in these rock breaker applications that these are really dynamic applications, incredibly severe, high impulse requirements, and MXG4K hose performs brilliantly in this application. The third one is my favorite because the customer gave us some metrics on how long the hose was installed. So this is on slide, yes, 23, sorry, 24 here. No, it was 24, I'm sorry, my screen was a little bit delayed. So in this case, this is another JCB excavator, different site though. And the average life of the old hose was 85 to 90 days in this example. And MXG4K hose had lasted more than 120 days and was still operating. So this is a clear value proposition for these customers. You know, not only is it easier to install and it's lighter weight, but it lasts longer than the legacy hoses. So that's clear savings to them, both in terms of hose cost, but also in terms of equipment uptime. So the next slide, slide 25, is a L2D boomer, so another mining application where MXG4K in this case is installed in a bundle of hoses. So they did like this, that it was more compact and lighter weight. This Extra Tough Plus cover is beneficial because this hose does rub against other hoses. So again, another dynamic application where the customer was incredibly pleased with MXG4K and not just did this initial field trial, but also placed additional orders for the product. Slide 26 is another boomer application. They also liked the flexibility and the Extra Tough Plus cover. And then this final story on slide 27 is my favorite because it is actually from Australia. So this was on a Sandvik Jumbo. The customer really liked the flexibility, the Extra Tough Plus cover, and they liked that this had a tighter minimum bend radius than their legacy hoses. As you can see here, this is used in a dynamic application, and you know, it's routed around, I forget the name of this, the spool. It's routed in a dynamic application though, and again, MXG4K is performing great in this application for this customer. You can see here a really great picture too of where MXG, it's obvious here where MXG4K is in this application.
The term we use here is a pulley.
A pulley, thank you. So I hope that you're seeing through these examples that it's not just, you know, take my word for it, MXG4K is a great hose. Yes, of course I say that because I'm a Gates proponent. But this is a lot of other people also telling us that MXG4K drives a lot of value in their applications. So I've go ahead, Kent.
Sorry, I don't want to cut in there, but yeah, thanks for the information provided. I mean, there was a hang of a lot of information. and you've actually seen both the theoretical aspect of MXG and what it actually offers, and then you've actually got practical applications in regards to where the hoses are being used. And I just want to make a comment on, I mean, the rock break applications, those are one of the toughest type applications for hydraulic hose. And to see MXG, 4K do so well in those type applications kind of proves itself, in that particular type of conditions and environment. So what we'll do now is, So what we'll do now is we'll turn it over to, I guess, the audience, and just feel free to ask Cindy any questions in relation to the information covered, and we'll go from there. So I'll flip it over to this next slide, which allows for comments or any questions. And if you have anything further to add, Cindy, feel free to do so.
Okay.
But we'll put it out to the audience, and we'll pause now for a moment for them to respond. So I've got a question that's come through now, just to the Q&A sort of box, and the question that's come up is, how does MXG 4K differ from M4K?
Sure, that's a great question. There's a few ways. First, MXG 4K is rated for high temp. So M4K is rated for 100 Celsius, whereas MXG 4K is rated for 121 Celsius. And you might think 20 degrees, is that really such a big deal? I'll tell you it is. It is a very big deal. Second, MXG 4K is rated to 1 million cycles, whereas M4K is rated to 600,000 cycles. Also, MXG 4K comes standard with our Extra Tough Plus cover. M4K has a great cover, but it's more for standard performance. It's not rated for the same 25 times abrasion resistance or ozone resistance as our Extra Tough Plus cover.
So the clear distinctions there is the temperature.
The temperature.
And the impulse cycles.
The impulse cycles and the cover, yeah. Those are three major differences, yeah.
Another question, and feel free if you can answer it. This is more so in relation to that XTP type cover. It's got a high level of ozone resistance. How does that rate, or how does that compare to just a standard cover, or an XTT or an XTF cover without the XTP?
Sure. So ozone resistance is it's not challenging to measure necessarily. The way ozone tests work is we put the hose into an ozone cabinet, so it's generating ozone at a specified parts per million. The hose is bent at a certain bend radius, usually it's the minimum bend radius, and we leave the hose in there for hours and days and months. And the standard ozone test is an ISO, I think it's ISO 6802. I don't know, Kevin Waltz is on the phone. I feel like he always knows what all these standards are. But it's an industry standard test, and we measure at 24 hours, at 48 hours, at 72 hours, and then usually we just keep letting it running, and we're looking for cracks. So here, the challenge is we're counting cracks. So it's not like it's a very specified measurement of, like abrasion is grams lost per 2,000 cycles. We don't have the same specified measurement for ozone. So what we can say is when we test them head to head, the Extra Tough Plus cover lasts significantly longer. Like with Extra Tough Plus, we've been able to pass a really rugged and rigorous 800-hour test. So 800 hours is like more than a month. So for more than a month, this hose sits in that ozone cabinet and does not crack. So I can't say it's like 6 times better because, again, we're counting cracks. And so like one crack is a failure. And so it's a little bit challenging to say how many times better it might be, but we can say that it passes this really, really challenging 800-hour test I guess it's JLG's test. I don't think that's a secret. JLG has this 800-hour test, so we're able to pass that with MXG 4K and the Extra Tough Plus cover.
Awesome. It's great. It's good to know that. Good to know that sort of variance between the two. I've got another question here for you. This is more chemical application type question, so see how you fare with this.
Okay.
Otherwise, I can always
I feel
look
like
it up
I'm like,
afterwards.
this is like, how much does Cindy Cookson know? I'm just kidding. Ask away.
So the question that's actually come through is, can this, I guess it's got to do with the tube stock and the compatibility, but can it actually be used on propylene glycol, for example, engine sort of coolant, such as brake oil, coolant hose? I think the recipient is looking at potentially using MXG 4K as an alternative to what he's currently using based on the properties it actually offers.
I do not have the answer to that question, but I certainly 100% can find out and pass the information along to Kent. But I don't have the answer to that question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We can definitely most certainly follow that up and just review our chemical resistance charts and confirm that the actual tube stock versus the chemicals asked there. The other question, I can answer this one. This is a fairly straightforward. Is MXG available in Australia? It most certainly is. We're stocking all sizes from -6 right up to -16.
Yes.
I think that's all that's come through at this stage. I can't see anything at this point in time. One question that's just popped through now is the US have used Landau as their first OEM to adopt MXT. Have there been any OEMs that you're aware of from a global sort of standpoint that have adopted MXG 4K that you're allowed to talk about?
I can say that we have had some OE adoption, and we are not allowed to use any names today, unfortunately. But you can see there's lots of, we had lots of examples in these success stories that we shared of customers using it in a variety of OE equipment from different OE suppliers. But we can't talk about OE adoption. We can't divulge names. So.
Yeah,
but this is specified at some OEs.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's just, I guess, there's just that general sort of interest to know, who's taking it up from a global standpoint. Diesel fuel. How does MXG 4K stack up against diesel fuel? Is that one of those chemical resistance chart review type questions?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, and this data exists. I don't have it. I apologize. But we can propylene glycol and diesel fuel. I will follow up.
Yeah. The other question is there, in terms of the construction of MXG 4K, you've mentioned that it's a two-wire braid construction. I guess I've really answered that question. Is there a 2 or 4 wire layer of wire braid with MXG 4K?
So it's 2 braid layers. So, but each braid layer, has wire going in each direction. So, you have first braid layer, and then a friction material, and then a second braid layer. So, it is. You can almost say you have 2 layers going in one direction, then 2 layers going in the opposite direction, and they're braided together rather than spiraled on top of each other. So, it is 2. If you consider a traditional braid, it's 2 traditional braid layers, but it's not a traditional braid design. It is an innovative design. So it's like if you looked at M4K and looked at MXG 4K, you would see the difference in the braid layers. There's a lot more wire in MXG 4K.
And that's those sort of unique sort of wire pack properties that are actually gone into this particular hose, and that obviously is reflective in regards to the performance criteria that it actually meets.
Yeah, the million impulse cycles at these elevated temperatures, it requires something beyond what a traditional 2-wire braid hose does. So even though, this isn't a wire spiral hose exactly, but it performs like a wire spiral hose. It's also, we don't want to pigeonhole it into a wire braid category either, because it's so much beyond what a traditional wire braid hose can do.
No, terrific. Well, thanks a lot for your time once again, and thanks a lot for answering the various sort of questions and providing us with a lot of information to take away with regarding MXG 4K. To the recipients out there, we have run a promotion surrounding this particular webinar, and we'll actually send out promotional packs in line with the information conveyed today, as well as the different sort of promotional merchandise that comes with attending this particular webinar. So I hope you got a lot out of it. I certainly did. It's always good to hear it from various different sort of channels, particularly from Cindy. Great job in terms of presenting MXG 4K. And then just this other aspect of saying, yeah, we still are open in terms of virtual interaction with Gates, particularly in Victoria. Most other states probably just as normal, but video conferencing, telephone, as well as email is also available. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot, Cindy, once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah,
or evening
good day,
for
Paul. Yeah, bye.
Bye for now.